Hi, my name is Chuck Sheridan. I'd like to share with you a little bit of a testimony. It's about the goodness of God, the faithfulness of God to me. If you're not a believer, you're not interested in God's stories, go somewhere else. But this is a motorcycle God story. In 1989, I bought a modified Honda CB750K model for $200. It needed a lot of work, but it seemed roadworthy, and I actually rode it home, and then I started all the work to fix it up. I'll call it my first generation of that motorcycle. In the summer of 1996, I injured my right elbow and I couldn't work. I was going to be off work for a while. And since I couldn't work, then I also couldn't ride my motorcycle. So I loaned it to my pastor, and he really enjoyed it. Maybe he enjoyed it a little bit too much. God must have heard his prayers, because the Lord suggested to me that I should give him my motorcycle. My thought was, sure, I'll give him my motorcycle once I have one to replace it. There couldn't be a better man to have that motorcycle than that pastor. It seemed only to be a suggestion until July 1998, and then it became a command to give my pastor my motorcycle. I wrestled with God all summer about that. I had a lot of trouble with it, but God won. I was going to submit and do as I believed the Lord wanted me to. I asked the man if he had $5, and I guess he thought I was just borrowing $5, and as he passed me the $5, I dropped the keys to the motorcycle in his hand and told him he now owned that motorcycle, and it was a $5 gift to him. I then snuck the $5 into the saddlebag, and I'd signed the ownership and left it with him. Now I didn't have a ride. People were asking me, so what are you going to do? You're the president of a motorcycle club and you don't have a motorcycle. I said, God has a motorcycle prepared for me. He just hasn't given me the serial number yet. And if I did have the serial number, I'd go register it. I would just trust God on this. We had a coffee cafe ministry going on the main street of Winnipeg, and one evening a lady walked in and she came over and sat down and told me she had a Harley Davidson Sportster for sale. She needed to sell it quickly. Something just didn't seem right. I was a little suspicious, so I got some serial numbers, and I knew people in town and had the serial numbers checked, and sure enough, she checked out and the bike checked out. It had a clean title. I met with her again and shared the gospel message about the forgiveness of sins and the love that God had for her, and she accepted Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior. And then I bought her a motorcycle. It was that Sportster. It did need some work, and you had to have a safety inspection, so I went to work on it, doing the safety, getting it ready for the shop. Another friend of mine told me where I should take it for the safety inspection. And so I did. I dropped it off there. What I didn't expect was the shop figured it needed a lot more work, and it was going to be a bit of a bill. Still to this day, I think they were drumming themselves up a little bit more business. And then when they let me know that the bike was ready and I went to pick it up, I found out that the bill had already been paid by another man. So I shared with them. That's how the church operates. We are Christians, and that's what we do for one another. I was blessed to be able to share the good message about Jesus Christ with that shop owner. I still hadn't ridden the bike. I'd sat on it, I'd gone through the gears, but it's the dead of winter, so we loaded it up on a truck and we headed to Daytona, Florida, to the Daytona Motorcycle Rally. 5 days later, I unloaded it and finally got to check it out. And a friend of mine who was from North Carolina, he asked me, he said, what happened to that radical Honda you had? So I told him the story, and he got kind of sick looking on his face, and I thought, what's up with him? He got real serious, and he said something I didn't expect. He said he had a 1970 Triumph Tiger 650, and he was going to give it to me. Was he for real? Yeah, it was. A couple weeks later, I went by his place, and he showed me his shop and all the motorcycles he had, and he gave me that motorcycle. It was a fun piece of machinery. My wife and I enjoyed riding around on that very much. During an assembly for our denomination, I met with the district director who I was accountable to, and he called me up on stage and shared with the people who were in attendance about the work I was doing in Winnipeg amongst the biker community. And he started to tease me because he heard that I had given my pastor my motorcycle. Not wanting to be for a loss of words, I said, I have lots of spare parts. I'll build you a motorcycle. You gotta be careful what you say, because I also realize that lots of people give me stuff and sometimes they give me junk. And I knew I was going to be building a motorcycle out of a bunch of spare parts, and I thought, I can't build him a piece of junk. People give me junk and I accept it graciously and just say, thank you, and may the Lord bless you in proportion to your giving. Yeah. Now what was I going to do? I told this man I was going to build him a motorcycle. It better be a goodie. Well, later on that summer, I decided I was going to keep the Sportster, or was I going to keep the Triumph? But the Triumph, it wouldn't sell. And I prayed and prayed, wanting to sell the Triumph, and knowing that the Sportster would be better for my ministry there in the Winnipeg area. Then the Lord convinced me that I should give that district director that Triumph. So loaded it up on a truck and took it to his church over in Thunder Bay. And some of the guys there, I met with them and told them what I was going to do. And we put it on an elevator and took it from the back entry level up in the elevator onto the main floor. During the service, we rolled it down the aisleway as he went up to the pulpit, and I get up there and in front of everybody, I reminded him of the story and gave him my motorcycle. I gave him that Triumph. I didn't do it to be brash, but you see, in front of public, I told people I was going to build him a motorcycle. And I did all this because I wanted to share that God had given me that Triumph, and I wanted to share a lesson of obedience to God. And that's also why I'm trying to share this. In the next few years, I just rode the Sportster and fixed it again, rode the Sportster. I got a lot of miles out of it. But this one winter, it seemed like my fingers were all thumbs, and I wasn't getting the repairs done that I needed to get done to get it ready for the road again. I couldn't get anything right. I'm usually pretty good at fixing my own motorcycles. I do all my own work, and this time it just seemed like I had thumbs, not fingers. My wallet was empty. What was I going to do? I finally got it together. Got it together in time for a ride in May down to Badette, Minnesota for a target shoot and a barbecue. It was May 10th, 2003. It was our icebreaker ride, and it was raining. It's a miserable trip. Terrible. And so many friends showed up, and one couple showed up, and I thought it was kind of odd because he was an elder of the church, and he didn't usually come out to some of our primitive events. And then, let's gather together, everybody said, and our host starts having a few words, and why do these people have cameras? The host of our event was a man named John Campbell. We called him John Deere. And he started his speech, and he's directing it at me, and I knew something was up. I'm thinking they want to reduce me down from being president. Maybe this is a mutiny and they're going to gang up on me or what. Now one of my other friends is being talkative, and he's talking about obedience to the Lord and following the directions the Lord gives you. He's talking and telling the stories about how I'd given away 2 motorcycles and would I do it again. He wants me to hand over the ownership of my Sportster. How crazy is that? Just a minute, I need to talk to my wife. Now you see, I don't hear God talking to me, but these men, these women are close friends to me. They're church elders. I would trust them with my life. And it won't do me any harm. Yes, I'll give them my motorcycle. And my wife agreed. She thought God was in on this. As I presented them the keys to my Sportster, some of the men in the room and some of the ladies were giggling. Some of the men in the room were actually weeping. Now they had a cake for me, and it wasn't even my birthday. At least not for another month. But I guess when you give away 3 motorcycles, it's like AA, you get a cake. And on that cake, there's a picture of an FLH Harley Davidson. Nice bike. Time to eat. I like to eat. Hey, no fair, I said. My cake has a key in it. I want another piece of cake. Sometimes I'm not the brightest candle on the birthday cake. Now another guy has tears in his eyes, and he's trying to tell me that that key is for a 1998 Harley Davidson FLH TCUI, and it's mine, and it's out in the barn, and it was a gift from all my friends for Lynn and I. They start telling me it's an old geezer bike, and I should be riding an old geezer. Some young guy mouthed off and said that. I hit him later with a respectable punch. You'll never know, and I'll never know. I want to say thank you to Michael, Len Buckley, Debbie Smith, John Campbell, Steve Harder, so many dozens and dozens of people who made that possible. I'll never know. God knows. God knows. So my wife and I got on the motorcycle and took it for a ride, and when you go from a old 77 Sportster to a 98 Harley, and there's a whole instrument panel in front of you with all them gauges, it seems like an airplane. And in no time at all, you're doing 90 miles an hour because you got a windshield in front of you and you're used to just being full face in the wind. Further in this story, I got a letter from a pastor down in Leeds, South Dakota. And he was faithful to Jesus, and he was moving down to Texas. And he had left a Suzuki Samurai for me. What a blessing. We drove down to Leeds and we visited with him and we said our goodbyes. And Mike was such a good pastor, such a good man. There was a copy of that letter. And here's a bit of a testimony I wrote. Hi, Mike. Do you remember me giving me that little 4x4? Oh, how I liked that Suzuki Samurai. I was so glad to have it, but I couldn't get it home. I didn't have an extra driver for the bike and for the truck, and just couldn't make it work to get permits. And the little truck, Suzuki Samurai, wouldn't even do 60 miles an hour on the highway, and there's problems with getting insurance and licenses and permits to get into Canada. So I left it behind there in Sturgis, Deadwood, with a friend of ours, and we decided to bless somebody else with it, though I really wanted it. I wanted it for my little hunting vehicle. So I gave it to a friend of mine there in the Black Hills. He was a mechanic, and he was delighted. Then he gave his car to a high school student that needed a car so she could get down the road back and forth to go to university. And he fixed up that little 4x4 and he painted it with camouflage colors, and he sent me a picture. Man, I was happy for him. But hey, I wanted it. I prayed and asked the Lord to accept it as my offering and change my heart. He did. And I settled with it and was glad that the little truck went to good use and that man gave his car to a university girl. That was back in August 2005. That's a portion of the letter I sent to Mike. Later that summer, we met a man by accident. At least I thought it was by accident, but he had been watching our ministry. He had researched about us. He knew who we were. He knew all of us, and he was happy to meet us. He was a very interesting man. He was full of joy, full of faith. We met for lunch, and he talked a lot. Then he said he'd been paid for some work that he had done for GMC dealership, and they were giving him two 2008 diesel 4x4 trucks as payment for the work he did for them. And he was asking the Lord what to do with the extra truck. And the Lord told him to give that truck to me. The deal was that I was supposed to go down to the GMC dealership and order a truck. Whether it be a Sierra or a Silverado, it didn't matter. 4x4, 3/4 ton diesel truck. Well, it all went like he said. In late October 2007, I picked up a truck. It is ours. It's in the ministry's name. And boy, we use that truck a lot to help out delivering groceries to the food bank and helping people move furniture, moving motorcycles, and just getting back and forth to another church because we were pastoring two churches and they were 2.5 hours apart. God really blessed us. The little 4x4 Suzuki Samurai was the seed, and it grew up to be a 385 horsepower 4x4 big red truck. You see, God blesses back to those who are obedient to Him. Now in September 2018, I get a message from a man who was the original owner of that same Honda chopper that I used to own from 1989 to 1998, and that I had given away, the one that I started my story with. And it had been through a few hands, and he had reacquired the bike, and he was the owner now of that bike, and I had originally bought it from him in 1989. And he asked me if I knew anybody who wanted that bike. Well, my wife and I had just talked about that same motorcycle the day before, and I said, yes, I'd like to have it back. He said, well, if you want it back, you can have it free. It's for you. I gave it away, and now it was being given back to me. So here I am with the Harley Davidson FLH TCUI and that old Honda chopper that I'd given away. And in between that, I'd had a couple of trucks and a Sportster. There was an interruption in February 2019. Lynn and I went to Mexico for a vacation to see a friend of ours and just get out of the snow and the cold of Winnipeg for a while. And while we were there, we got offered an opportunity that I'd be able to work part-time as the associate pastor. So in April 2019, we loaded up and we moved to Mexico. 6 months later, we went back to Canada, gathered up all our property, including that motorcycle. And we entered the border, crossing with the motorcycle, all our stuff. And the Honda looked like a parts bike. And I didn't have all the parts for it. And I knew I was missing a lot of parts for it. Finding parts for a 750K model that's 50 years old in Mexico is really a challenge. I made some parts. I ordered stuff on eBay. I found Facebook people that would sell me part. One kind gentleman down here in Mexico named Earl, he went and he gave me the same bike, a 1974 Honda K model, but his was completely stocked with fairings. It had so many nuts and bolts, exhaust pipes, so many little pieces that I needed. I could use it for a lot of parts. You might think that was bad to butcher it up, but it sat in the open air outside about 100 yards from the ocean in a bodega where all the salt air could come in on top of it. It was very, very rusty, very badly corroded. I've been selling some parts off and donating the money to an orphanage. After 2 years, I finally got the bike running at 750K. And after another 3 years of picking up parts, I finally got it complete. Then I went through the process of importing it into Mexico so I could put proper permit on it, get insurance for it, plate for it. Oh, the way they do things in Mexico. It took 5 visits to the license office for me to finally get it registered and get a license plate. There's one little change. The bike is 50 years old and Mexico doesn't have any model listed as Honda CB 750K. And so they registered it as a Honda CB 750 Nighthawk. While I still have a Canadian title for it, I never exported it out of Canada. And if I ever returned to Canada, I could re-register it again in Canada. Now I call it the Frankenstein, and on the rear fender, I'm putting a decal of Frankenstein because it really is. It's the third version of this same motorcycle. Next year, the plan is to import the Harley Davidson, put fresh tires and battery in it, and make that our highway bike. Such a process down here. But what is God doing? And what is God saying? Just look to Jesus is what I'm telling you. What are you doing, God? And what do you want me to do with my life? Here's the lesson here. Trust Him for provision. Give faithfully in tithes and offerings. Listen carefully for Him to speak. And then be obedient. Because God has a plan for you to enrich your life. And I promise you, it'll be amazing. Now I'm wondering, where does it go from here?